Welcome to the Get Started with Azure AI Services learning path. This module covers Monitor Azure AI Services. Unit 1, Introduction. Azure AI Services provides a cloud-based platform for building artificial intelligence capabilities into your applications. Like any software service, you should monitor AI services to track costs, identify utilization trends, and detect potential issues. After completing this module, you'll be able to monitor Azure AI Services costs, create alerts and view metrics for Azure AI Services, manage Azure AI Services diagnostic logging. Unit 2, Monitor cost. One of the main benefits of using cloud services is that you can gain cost efficiencies by only paying for services as you use them. Some Azure AI Services resources offer a free tier with restrictions on use, which is useful for development and testing, and one or more billed tiers that incur charges based on transactions. The specific billing rate depends on the resource type. Plan costs for AI services. Before deploying a solution that depends on AI services, you can estimate costs by using the Azure pricing calculator. To use the pricing calculator to estimate AI services costs, create a new estimate and select Azure AI Services in the AI plus machine learning category. Select the specific AI service API you plan to use, for example, Azure AI language. For the API, select the region where you plan to provision it and the pricing tier of the instance you plan to use. Then, fill in the expected usage metrics and support option. To create an estimate that includes multiple AI Services APIs, add more Azure AI Services products to the estimate. After you create an estimate, you can save it. You can also export it in Microsoft Excel format. View costs for AI services. In common with other Azure resources, you can view details of accumulated costs for AI services resources in the Azure portal. To view costs for AI services, sign into the Azure portal and select your subscription. You can then view overall costs for the subscription by selecting the Cost Analysis tab. To view only costs for AI services, add a filter that restricts the data to reflect resources with a service name of Azure AI Services. Note: for more information, see Plan and Manage Costs for Azure AI Services in the AI Services documentation. Unit 3, Create Alerts. Microsoft Azure provides alerting support for resources through the creation of alert rules. You use alert rules to configure notifications and alerts for your resources based on events or metric thresholds. These alerts will ensure that the correct team knows when a problem arises. Alert rules. To create an alert rule for an Azure AI Services resource, select the resource in the Azure portal and on the Alerts tab, add a new alert rule. To define the alert rule, you must specify the scope of the alert rule, in other words, the resource you want to monitor, a condition on which the alert is triggered. The specific trigger for the alert is based on a signal type, which can be activity log, an entry in the activity log created by an action performed on the resource, such as regenerating its subscription keys, or metric, a metric threshold, such as the number of errors exceeding 10 in an hour. Optional actions, such as sending an email to an administrator notifying them of the alert, or running an Azure Logic app to address the issue automatically. Alert rule details, such as a name for the alert rule and the resource group in which it should be defined. Note: for more information, see Overview of Alerts in Microsoft Azure in the Azure documentation. Unit 4, View Metrics. Azure Monitor collects metrics for Azure resources at regular intervals so that you can track indicators of resource utilization, health, and performance. The specific metrics gathered depend on the Azure resource. In the case of Azure AI Services, Azure Monitor collects metrics relating to endpoint requests, data submitted and returned, errors, and other useful measurements. View metrics in the Azure portal. You can view metrics for an individual resource in the Azure portal by selecting the resource and viewing its metrics page. On this page, you can add resource-specific metrics to charts. By default, an empty chart is created for you, and you can add more charts as required. For example, the following image shows the metrics page for an AI Services resource, showing the count of total calls to the service over a period of time. You can add multiple metrics to a chart and choose appropriate aggregations and chart types. When you're satisfied with chart, you can share it by exporting it to Excel or copying a link to it, and you can clone it to create a duplicate chart in the metrics page, potentially as a starting point for a new chart that shows the same metrics in a different way. Add metrics to a dashboard. In the Azure portal, you can create dashboards that consist of multiple visualizations from different resources in your Azure environment to help you gain an overall view of the health and performance of your Azure resources. To create a dashboard, select Dashboard in the Azure portal menu. Your default view may already be set to a dashboard rather than the portal homepage. From here, you can add up to 100 named dashboards to encapsulate views for specific aspects of your Azure services that you want to track. You can add a range of tiles and other visualizations to a dashboard, and when viewing metrics for a specific resource in a chart, as described previously, you can add the chart to a new or existing dashboard. In the following image, 2 charts showing metrics for an AI services resource have been added to a dashboard. Note, for more information about dashboards, see Create a Dashboard in the Azure portal in the Azure documentation. Unit 5, Manage Diagnostic Logging. Diagnostic logging enables you to capture rich operational data for an Azure AI Services resource, which can be used to analyze service usage and troubleshoot problems. Create resources for diagnostic log storage. To capture diagnostic logs for an AI Services resource, you need a destination for the log data. In certain cases, you can use Azure Event Hubs as a destination for the log data. Azure Event Hubs allows you to forward the data onto a custom telemetry solution and connect directly to some third-party solutions. However, in most cases, you'll use one or both of the following kinds of resource within your Azure subscription. Azure Log Analytics, a service that enables you to query and visualize log data within the Azure portal. Azure Storage, a cloud-based data store that you can use to store log archives, which can be exported for analysis in other tools as needed. You should create these resources before configuring diagnostic logging for your AI Services resource. If you intend to archive log data to Azure Storage, create the Azure Storage account in the same region as your AI Services resource. Configure diagnostic settings. With your log destinations in place, you can configure diagnostic settings for your AI Services resource. You define diagnostic settings on the Diagnostic Settings page of the blade for your AI Services resource in the Azure portal. When you add diagnostic settings, you must specify a name for your diagnostic settings, the categories of log event data that you want to capture, details of the destinations in which you want to store the log data. In the following example, the diagnostic settings store all available log data and metrics in Azure Log Analytics and Azure Storage. View log data in Azure Log Analytics. It can take an hour or more before diagnostic data starts flowing to the destinations, but when the data has been captured, you can view it in your Azure Log Analytics resource by running queries as shown in this example. Note, for more information, see Enable Diagnostic Logging for Azure AI Services in the Azure AI Services documentation. Unit 7, Knowledge Check. Question 1. How should you collect telemetry for your Azure AI Services resource for later analysis? A. Create an alert. B. Configure diagnostic settings. C. Create a dashboard. Question 2. You are defining an alert that notifies you when a key regeneration event is recorded in the activity log for your Azure AI Services resource. What should you do? A. Specify a scope of activity log. B. Specify an action that uses an Azure Logic app to read the activity log. C. Specify a condition with a signal type of activity log. Question 3. You are viewing a metric for your Azure AI Services resource in a chart. You want to combine the chart with visualizations of other resources and data. What should you do? A. Add the chart to a dashboard. B. Share the chart. C. Clone the chart. Unit 8, Summary. In this module, you learned how to monitor Azure AI Services costs, create alerts, and view metrics for Azure AI Services, manage Azure AI Services diagnostic logging. To learn more about Azure AI Services, refer to the AI Services documentation.